wokeness is an ongoing process, right? It's not this finish line. It's not like, okay, so you learned some stuff, now you know some stuff, now you're woke. Like, it is a constant process of unfolding and evolving and growing. And so I'm learning different things every day. Part of the American mythology, which is central, I mean, going back and again using a religious metaphor, sort of Genesis 1:1 of Americanism, secular gospel, is the idea that wherever you end up is all about you, right? That's that notion of rugged individualism, that notion of meritocracy. There's really never been a country in the history of the world that had that ideology, right? Every other country, if you were a feudal monarchy in Europe, you knew that you weren't going to go from the bottom to the top. You had to be connected to the king. You had to be blood relatives. So in this country, though, we create this mythology that, hey, anybody can be the king, quote unquote. Anybody can be on the top. And so if you believe that, and we are taught that, every one of us is taught that at some level, and you believe it, then what happens is, if you see white folks at the top of that system, the ideology of Americanism is telling you, well, they must be better. That's why they're there. After all, if they're there, they are the best by definition. And if you see black and brown folks at the bottom, you assume, well, they must deserve that, because if they didn't, they would be on top. And so ultimately, sort of racist thinking, stereotypes, and the denial of privilege flow very naturally from the core ideology of Americanism. And so does sexism, because if you have men disproportionately here and women here, you're going to assume that male domination is natural. If you have rich here, regardless of color, and poor here, same thing. You assume, well, poor people, even, right, this is what I talk about in the book, the idea that poor white folks in Appalachia, they must be lazy too. And the rich folks like Donald Trump, the rich folks who are much richer than Donald Trump, must, 37 people in this country have the same amount of wealth as the bottom half of the population. Now, at some level, I think all of us know there's no way 37 people have worked harder than the bottom 150 million people, right? But our ideology sort of tells us, well, they must have. They just must be that smart. They had that great an idea, and that's why they're wealthy. So I think that's why it's hard to shift paradigm, is because in order to shift the paradigm, you literally have to deconstruct the most fundamental belief of your system. It's like going to church, sitting in the front pew, standing up in the middle of the sermon and announcing that God doesn't exist. That's an incredibly difficult sell in church, and this is an incredibly difficult sell in a culture that's really committed and addicted to the notion of white supremacy, and has been for a very long time. When whiteness was unquestioned, when male domination, Christian domination, straight domination, all of those things were just taken for granted. And that's why when you see the hat that says "Make America Great Again," I mean, the irony, right, of this whole NFL protest thing we're seeing, you got a black man, Colin Kaepernick, and other black athletes mostly, who were saying, in order to make America great, not again, but for the first time, we got to deal with police and violence and criminal justice, racism, and that's not allowed. But if you have a white man whose entire slogan is about America sort of sucking wind, which if I tell you make America great again, what I just told you is America needs changing. America is flawed. America is broken. America needs to be fixed. White people can say that. As long as you're coming from the right and you're a white person, you can say America's horrible. We're falling behind. We got to fix it. But if you're a person of color and you express any kind of criticism, then you're ungrateful, right? And so that's what those folks are saying, is we want to go back to a time when our prerogatives, our centrality, our way of understanding the world was not questioned. And we can't go back to that. And young people, thankfully, don't want to go back to that. Young people want to look forward. These folks want to look backward. And that's what our choice is. We're either going to make America great for the first time for everybody, or we're going to go back to a time when it was only great for a very narrow sliver. For white folks, just that first time that you challenge some of that nonsense actually has a potential to change that person, and not just the way they act around you, but now they got to wonder every time they're around another white person, like, oh my God, maybe I can't get away with saying these things. And over time, if you don't say those things as much, you get out of practice. And anti-racism takes practice, and so does racism. And if you don't get in your practice, you're not as good at it. So if I can interrupt your practice, I'll do that. Here, because my thing has always been, look, if racism ended, I'm thinking that would have made the news, right? Like that would have been on the front page. That would you would have seen. You could Google that. You'd be like, what day did racism end? And it would pop up, and that hasn't happened. So to that extent, we just need to stop pretending. So when white folks are challenging people of color's narratives or their stories or their experiences, that's like us saying that black and brown folks don't have enough sense to actually intuit their own lived experience. Now, you may not mean to be a racist by saying that, but by definition, if I tell you that you are in effect irrational as a black person or as a Latinx person or any person of color, then I'm saying that I, as a white person, have superior insight into your life. That is a fundamentally supremacist thing. And we would recognize that, like, if you were telling me that you had been molested as a child or abused as a child, and I was like, no, you weren't. Be like, what kind of horrible human being are you that you're denying my experience? But we do that every day. We do that every day with race.